Welcome to another episode of the Path Talk Show. I have an exciting guest. He's the owner of a BJJ martial arts school. He's done over 70 to 100 films and TV series. He's an actor and producer. Welcome, Richard Norton.
Thank you, Justin. Pleasure to be with you.
I appreciate you coming down. I know you have a busy schedule, and I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, mate. I wish I wasn't so busy. I swore I was going to start saying no a lot more to things, but there you go.
Well, I greatly appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I was just wondering, how did your journey begin in terms of starting into acting?
It was really just a matter of circumstance. In 1970, after training with a gentleman named Tino Severano in karate, I met a gentleman named Bob Jones, who was 10 years older than me. Bob ended up wanting to leave and start his own style of martial arts, and which we did and started a school in Elizabeth Street called Zendokai. And Bob wanted me to go with him, which I ended up doing. And the reason I bring that up, that led to, in 1978, Bob went to the US and happened to meet up with Chuck Norris, and ended up bringing Chuck Norris out to Australia in 78 to do some demonstrations at some kickboxing tournaments. And, Chuck I think he'd done Good Guys Wear Black and Breaker, some of his early action movies. So he was eager to promote those as well as just come out and demonstrate. And I ended up doing demonstrations on the same card in each of the states using Japanese weapons, etc. And Chuck and I really established a good friendship on that trip. So that was that. The thing about that was when Chuck left, he said, "Look, Rich, if you ever get over here to the US, give me a call. We'll do some training," which you can imagine for a kid growing up in Croydon, skinny little asthmatic kid, to get an invitation like that was pretty special. But I never actually thought I would get to the US. Now, the other part of that story is due to Bob and his running a security company. I started doing personal bodyguard work in 1973, started with the Rolling Stones, went on to work with Joe Cocker. I was with David Bowie for 8 years, Linda Ronstadt, James Taylor for 14 years, ABBA. The list went on. And after a tour with Linda Ronstadt in 1978, Linda wanted me to go and work for her full-time in the US. I was a bit hesitant, reluctant, which we'll talk about. You kind of in your nice little security sort of environment here in Melbourne. I had schools, girlfriend, the whole works. So it was a big step. Anyway, I ended up taking that leap. And the first person I called up was Chuck. And when it started training with Chuck Norris at his house every morning, he lived in a place called Rolling Hills Estates, which is out past the airport in Los Angeles. And he was in pre-production for one of his movies titled The Octagon. And he needed somebody that could handle Japanese weapons and everything else. And because of being with me in Australia, he could see I was apt with those, and he wanted me to become his main nemesis in The Octagon. So that was the start of the movie career. And it's not something that I went or ever thought I was going to get into, is in movies. Even though I had done a film called Last of the Knucklemen, I think in 1976, which was about bare-knuckle fighting in opal mining towns in outback Australia. We shot near Cooper Pedy. But again, that was just a one-off. So I end up in LA, end up with Chuck wanting me to be his nemesis. We started rehearsing, getting ready for the film. So I find myself on a set in Indian Dunes, it's called, in LA, with some amazing martial artists. Again, because that was my passion, martial arts. It wasn't to become an actor. But I thought, how good is this? I'm actually living my passion, getting paid to do it. And so away we went. I ended up doing some more movies with Chuck and auditioned for a couple of leads myself. Ended up getting those in a lower budget action genre, nothing major. But it just turned out to be an incredible journey. So that's how it all started. So I'd thank Bob in one way for meeting Chuck, and Chuck for giving me the opportunity to actually get in front of the camera and be a part of that whole industry.
That's amazing. And
Yeah.
yeah, it takes a lot of courage to be able to do something like that, especially you have to be able to make a big sacrifices to travel to the US, invest your time into that, into getting into acting. What advice would you give other actors that are on the board of being in Australia, but they want to go to the US and make themselves popular or get themselves in the industry in acting?
Oh, look, the first thing I would say was just you just got to go for it. You know, I often say to people, I've said it a lot, that if a skinny little asthmatic kid from Croydon can end up working, you know, in the action genre with Jackie Chan and Chuck Norris and all these people, then one would presume almost anybody can do it. It gets down to how badly do you want it. And I think it's about seizing opportunity. Now, don't get me wrong, if anyone going to Los Angeles or Hollywood, you know, as we like to say, to start a career as an actor, you are diving into an incredibly vast pool. Everybody that serves you coffee in LA is probably an actor in the restaurants, and it's huge. But so it's tough, you know. I was lucky, you know, in the action genre, it was still pretty new. Like nowadays, every martial artist I meet more or less wants to be an actor as well as being a martial artist. Back then, it was a little rare, you know. There was only a handful of us doing action movies. So I sort of jumped in at a good time. It's tough, but I would also say to people, well, somebody has to do it, and why not you? You know, you have to believe in yourself. What goes with that, though, nowadays, especially, again, when I started doing it, my skill that got me hired was martial arts. It doesn't cut it anymore. In other words, you know, I produced a couple of movies way back, and I knew that if we had 6 fights in it, it didn't care if there wasn't a story and the drama sucked. You know, you could still sell it. That doesn't work anymore, only because there's almost no action that hasn't already been done on camera. So there it gets down to character and story. And if you're going to want to get in, even in the action genre, you've got to understand drama. You've got to understand what it takes to become an actor, to be able to understand character, story, to break a script down, and not and more or less become an actor who also happens to know martial arts, in my case. Does that make sense? Because if you think about America, I mean, there's somebody who can do everything over there. There's every kind of look. There's every ethnicity, you know. So for you to go over and think you're going to be unique, well, you know, that's a stretch. But again, somebody has to do it. And if you're not going to be, at least put yourself in the barrel, as it were, then you've got no chance. You know that. You've got to learn to hang in there. You've got to, again, study drama. You've got to do all that. You've got to go to all the auditions. You know, and what I learned over there is if you do 100 auditions and you get called back once, you're actually doing pretty well, you know. So it's a struggle, but why not, you know? I remember when I, you know, auditioned for my first lead in a film called Force 5. And if you're not a martial artist, you wouldn't know people like Joe Lewis. Joe Lewis recently deceased, but he was a legendary martial artist. Bill Wallace, there's a whole lot of people that were auditioning for this film, Force 5. It was being produced and directed by Fred Weintraub, who produced Enter the Dragon, the legendary Bruce Lee movie, and Bob Klaus, who also directed Enter the Dragon. So here I am. A friend of mine said, oh, you should audition to this. I got an audition. Suddenly I'm on the floor with 100 different martial artists, some of the best in the world. And I suddenly went, oh, fuck. I mean, what hope have I got? I got a funny accent, at least to them, you know. What chance have I got? So I audition. It gets down to the final 10, and I'm still one of the final 10, which was a huge change in attitude for me, because I thought, well, if I'm down to the final 10, I must have most of what they need for this role. What's going to make me stand out? I was very much into visualization. You know, I did a course, it sounds very ominous, called Silver Mind Control, but it was really about, intention and setting and goal setting and visualizing what you would want from a future sort of event or whatever you're going to participate in. So I started visualizing the 10 of us in a line, and, it sounds a bit weird, but just Bob Klaus and Freddie Weintraub looking, going, there's something about him that's interesting, Cut to, I ended up getting one of the lead roles, which may change my attitude to, instead of why me, I started to say, why not me? I've trained just as hard as anybody. Why couldn't it be me? And that's what changed my whole, again, attitude to future roles and everything else. And as you point out, it's been, God knows, 80 movies, maybe 100. Yes, a lot of them are things that I wouldn't even want to watch again, but who cares, right? I was actually working, I was living my passion and really living the dream. And I've got to say, what was also interesting for me with this whole journey was when I left school, my mum was very old school. My dad died when I was 13, but she was always, you need security, you need to get into the public service, you'll get your superannuation and you'll retire at 60 and then you'll start living your life. God only knows if I had stayed there. But so I went straight from school in the immigration department and worked there for 10 years before I resigned and went over to the US. So I also knew what the 9 to 5 life was like, so I had a good contrast. So you can imagine being on movie sets in Greece and Croatia and Philippines and Thailand. What a contrast, right?
It is.
I thought, living the dream right here, and it's still going. That's what's great about it all.
Yeah, I love that, and I'm a big fan of visualization as well. It was kind of funny, like right before I got into this industry, I was trying to visualize what I wanted to do, and acting just kept coming up. And I remember finding a picture of Henry Winkler that I got from him when I was a kid. It says, "Justin, the world is yours. Go and get it."
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I ended up signing up to an extras agency just to get an idea what the acting industry was like. And that's where I actually met Dave. And he was just telling me all about the industry, got to introduce me to the fly choreographer. He's like, you have to talk to Richard Norton. He is the man. So
Nice.
just message him, just let him know that you know me, and he'll look after you from there. And then after we finished the set on The Fall Guy, I just remember sitting in a cafe and I had a try of this thing called lion's mane. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I just remember zipping it, and then I got a phone call, and that was from you. And I remember the advice you gave me just stuck with me. And I just remember you just saying, just focus on building up your acting craft, be a great listener, follow the director's directions, and...
Yeah, basically, you know, I always advise people, you need to understand the world you're jumping into. And even if it means, you know, there's so much to be said about getting a role as an extra, for instance, or what I would laugh in action movies as being thug number 5 in the background. And if you get that chance, just really watch what everybody learn what the assistant director does, what the sound person, how they light you, how to hit your mark. You know, just observe, because that will hold you in good stead. Because the thing about it is, I say to people, if you do get your chance, and maybe, again, you're thug number 3 and you're given a line, how you handle that and how prepared you are for that opportunity could be, and again, it's tough, could be the start of an incredible career. Because I know if I work as a fight coordinator and I get a bunch of stunties, the one thing I don't have time to do is teach a stunt person how to be on a movie set and how to behave and how it all works. That should be a given. You know, my real focus should just be on the actual fights, the choreography, working with the actors and everything like that. And that's why I'm saying you've got to understand it's not just a matter of being pretty and having a voice anymore, you know, or having some physical abilities. You've got to just understand how everything works. It's funny getting back to the visualization, because just to get back on that, I remember with Jim Carrey, you know, it was a big thing about him visualizing getting a $20 million check. And, you know, he'd go and just stand on this cliff face, I believe, and just visualize, which, of course, you know, all happened for him. You know, it's interesting because, and I'm digressing a bit with this visualization. There were some great tapes I listened to on intention. You know, I think Dr. Wayne Dyer was one of those that used to promote that in different people. But it's the idea that if, just say, for instance, you, as in might be going to pick up the phone and call the bank about a loan. Just to take a moment to visualize a perfect result for both of you, a win-win situation, getting the loan and all of that. The idea of it is that you're putting out an intention to the universe of what you want rather than leaving it as almost a bit of a crapshoot, you know, for what the universe will give. And it's like, well, if you don't know what you want, you know, how can you expect whatever that life force is to present that to you, if it makes sense, you know? So, and it doesn't mean you'll always get it, but one could rationalize there's probably a good reason why you also didn't get it. It might be for a better opportunity in another area. And I know we can argue about, well, then it doesn't necessarily always work. But I'm just a real believer in it, you know, putting intention. If I do a seminar even these days, I will always visualize the seminar, how I want the crowd to respond, you know, everything about the seminar, what I'm going to wear. So when I actually walk out there, I've already put an intention again to that future universe of what I want. So again, it's not just a random result, you know. I did that even with all my demonstrations when I started, when Chuck came out here. I again mentioned I was demonstrating on the same car with him. I had a couple of guys attacking with swords, and I'm using Sai there. It's an Okinawan weapon. And halfway through the demonstration, I was wearing, it's called a hakama, which is like a very traditional Japanese wear for martial artists. It's almost like culottes, if people remember culottes, like a divided skirt. Anyway, I'm moving around and I suddenly thought, wow, my toe feels really funny. And in the middle of the demo, I sort of decided, I pulled back and I looked down, and my second toe from the little one was hanging on with a bit of skin. It's on the top of my foot. The other one was broken, and it was just a white stub of bone. This is all in microseconds, by the way. And I'm looking down, I'm thinking, wow, that wasn't part of what I visualized, because I visualized everything, and I immediately went, you know what? I've trained too hard from this. Chuck Norris is here, and again, this is all in microseconds. I thought, I'm not going to stop now. I'm just going to keep on going. Ended up doing the whole thing, going to hospital, having microsurgery on my toes and everything else, but it was an interesting result of visualization, and also things that can crop up. But I also believe the visualization helped me get through it. You know, just go, no, this is not part of it. I'm going to keep going and do what I got to do. But anyway, it's I think the idea of intentions, of just putting out an intention, why not? You know, it could be just driving, you know, a long drive for 3 hours. I visualize a great drive. It's going to be fantastic. Not much traffic, blah, 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 blah. It takes a matter of half a minute or whatever to do that. And I would argue, what's the harm in giving it a shot and seeing how it works for you? And we're talking about almost trivial things compared to, say, a career choice. But I don't know. It's just always worked for me.
That's so fascinating. And it kind of reminds me of this quote. It's where focus goes, energy flows, right? Everything you visualize will happen according to how you imagine it. But it's kind of interesting too, where we do get tested in our visualization process and actually going through the actions of it, because of the law of action is one of the most important things in visualizations, right?
Right.
And I found, like, there was this famous podcast I was watching, and it was talking about how there's a reason why Santa gives his presents at night. It's through the darkness you get tested in order to receive what you always wanted after you get tested.
Oh, that's very deep, Justin.
Yeah.
Okay.
I always found that interesting.
Yeah, that whole thing, I started at a very young age doing that. You know, the visualization. I just felt it. You know, and anyone who's really understands sports and everything, there's hardly a golfer or a good golfer, or a basketball player that doesn't visualize. They visualize the ball going in a hoop, even if it's just before a shot. There's plenty of champions that use visualization even within the game and their sport and everything. So, I think there's plenty of proof. And by the way, if other people don't believe it, doesn't really affect my life. I just encourage people to at least look and do it and give it a shot. And there's energy. Thoughts are things. This is the other thing I read a zillion years ago when I was a teenager about. And the example is a light bulb. A light bulb didn't just become a light bulb out of nothing. It started as an idea in somebody's head, like any invention, somebody thinking about this. And depending on how intensely that person wanted that invention or that end result, it ends up manifesting, right? And so, again, there's tremendous examples of the power of that intention, that thought, how badly do you want it? Which gets us back to even if you wanted an acting career or to be a fantastic martial artist, just start to visualize what you want, create that future. What have you got to lose is what I would say. Even if you're listening to this going, well, that sounds a bit, airy-fairy. Who knows, right?
That's very true.
If you don't give it a try, it definitely won't work for you. So,
I don't know if you actually read this book. It's called Becoming the Supernatural by Dr. Joe Dispenza. So he speaks a lot about manifestation, visualization, but he also breaks down the science of it.
Oh, nice.
It's interesting because he breaks down the law of vibration and how it actually works, how you can achieve anything you want to achieve. Is like, I think in his earlier years when he was just being a doctor, he ended up having a accident in his car and he ended up having spinal injury. So he was stuck in his bed for like months, but all he had was his mind. So he was visualizing himself just fixing his vertebrae piece by piece until eventually, when he was told he would never walk again, he started to be able to walk and do things that people wouldn't imagine he would be able to do. But it was quite fascinating how he's able to identify that and also break down the science of it, which is
I'd like to get that, because there was another book I read about a gentleman who was he got the bends. He's on a research ship, went under the water or whatever happened. They pulled him out of the water. And they put him. They said, if you don't hop, and whatever reasons, they had this hyperbaric oxygen chamber on the ship, which is, for people to know, you go in a concealed sort of cocoon almost with almost pure oxygen, helps repair tissue, whatever it is. But anyway, he was told if he didn't go immediately in, he would be at best a quadriplegic. At worst, he would die.
wow.
He went through this. Cut to, this guy was a scientist, and he used to teach all things about the body. He knew how the blood system, cells, recreation, all this sort of stuff. And he became, again, his own invention in that way. He was supposed to be paralyzed. And I met him, all he had was a slight limp. And this is somebody who was supposed to be dead, or if not, he'd be quadriplegic. And he'd visualized energy, cells recreating. He basically, created his own sort of repair, which is the same as what you're mentioning. So, I read, and these are learned, intelligent people that are basically doing what we said. They're just using the power of the mind, to help just create that result they want. And I know I sound like a broken record. I say to people, what have you got to lose? 30 seconds of maybe just delving into this, you get a good result. It could sort of catapult you into doing a lot more research and the values of it. So,
That's fascinating. Are you a big fan of journaling as well?
Of?
Journaling.
No, I'm not, and I wish I was. And I wish I had have been. You mean like writing down everything that... No, that's a whole other story, because of being on the road with, the Rolling Stones and Cocker and ABBA and all these people, say, oh, you got to write a book, it'd be fascinating. First of all, I say to them, well, in one sense, I know you're talking about all the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, all the shit that goes on the road, which I knew everything about because I was like joined at the hip for a lot of the artists. But I said, no, I'd never do that. I would never write a kiss and tell book. I hate that, the butler that suddenly sort of tells all the stories. But I did realize that what would be interesting is what I call lessons that I've learnt from people at the top of their game. Whether it's a Chuck Norris or Jackie Chan or a David Bowie or Mick Jagger, I mean, people like that don't get to where they got without behaving in a certain manner, in a certain way. There's certain ways they conduct themselves and their passion for what they do and the never-ending search for excellence.
Yes.
And I would always argue excellence is unattainable, but the journey toward it is not, Again, getting back to journaling, and now the idea, and there's a gentleman who wants to do a bit of a doco on my experience, and so suddenly I'm like regretting being 74 and, your memory, going back to 73 with the Stones, it's hard to remember last week, let alone that long ago. So I wish I had written down a little bit of a daily journal on everything that went on and everything that happened. It would be fascinating for me, let alone for anybody else.
Oh, absolutely. You probably would have written like about 5 books already if you'd done that.
Oh, man, I know.
But it was interesting how you said you learnt things through all the most amazing people in the world like Jackie Chan, Chuck Norris, and other famous actors. What was the big things that you took away from them and you use on your daily life or your career?
The biggest thing for me, that the through line of all of them and people I know within martial arts is passion. I often say to people, try and find what makes you want to get up every day. I mean, what is it? And that's not easy, I'm generalizing. I believe a majority of people or a lot of people are just kind of going through the motions. They're probably working in a job they hate. They go to do the same job 9 to 5. They go home, they watch the same TV shows. They go to bed at the same time. They get up and then they do the same thing again. And all they're doing is waiting to get to 60, 65 to retire and actually start living, to which I would say, good luck if you make it. So the thing, what I find with, again, whether it's a Linda Ronstadt or James or Lindsey Buckingham, I'd say to people, there's never a time he wasn't trying to sort of find a new note on the guitar in the tour bus or whatever. In other words, he's living his passion, and, a lot of people look at, and I've said this a lot before, hopefully people listening to this won't get bored of hearing the same thing, but someone like a Keith Richards, I watched a Netflix show on Keith, a doco, and he's nearly 80. Again, all he's trying to do is be the best guitarist, songwriter, and or musician he can possibly be, still at that stage of his life. And I thought, how good is that? So his whole life has been about living his passion. The other thing that I learnt from them, which again parallels what a good martial artist would do, or their mindset, is to never accept mediocrity. To never be okay with just being okay. Well, I'm as good as that one, but I'm not as good as that one, but I'm okay. That to me is just boring, with Linda, I spent 14 years with Linda Ronstadt, and again, a lot of younger viewers won't remember Linda, but 10 Grammys, she was like Beyonce in her day. There was never a time she was not trying to improve, Where can I find a new voice coach who can help me hit a note in a slightly different way? I mentioned Lindsey Buckingham. How can I just play the guitar? Keith Richards, I loved that he was interviewed once, and I never forgot that a reporter once asked Keith, don't you get sick of playing Jumping Jack Flash? I mean, you've played it thousands of times. And he said, no. He said, because every time I play it slightly differently. I'm always trying to find a different way to express those notes within that song. And he said, you wouldn't be aware of it. But do you know what I mean? He was never happy with whatever he'd done the last show. I thought, wow, that's fascinating. I sort of play with that with martial arts. We have kata, it's called, it's a prearranged set of punches, blocks, and everything. It's almost like a library of techniques that could be used in possible combative situations. You can get very robotic with something like that because it doesn't change. Traditional martial arts dictate that basically you don't change the way the traditional forms are done. But for me, every time I do it, I'm trying to find a slightly different way, whether internally, externally, of expressing that set of movements, because I don't want to be the same martial artist I was a year ago or 5 years ago. I just want to keep finding a different way of expressing what I'm doing. And that's what I observed and witnessed in so many of the artists that I travel with. Look at David Bowie. I mean, the guy was a chameleon. We were at a show once, and I'm standing with David looking at the crowd, and he said, Rich, he said, look at them. He said, they're all dressed the way I was in the last tour. He said, they'll never catch me looking the same.
I love that.
If you look at the Ziggy Stardust, he was almost a precursor to the old glam rock and everything, the makeup. He went through so many sort of different expressions of himself with his music, and I thought, oh, God, how wonderful is that, Even at Jackie Chan, I did 4 movies with Jackie, playing the main bad guy, getting the shit punched out of me. But even he said, Rich, I have to keep trying to change my action. Even though what I'm doing is still good, people get bored. They go, okay, I've seen all of that. What else can you do, Hence, again, his desire to at least take what he's doing as an artist and just be it slightly different the next time, I think that there's big lessons, I would say excellence is unattainable, as I said, but the journey toward it is not. Just keep striving to be a little better than what you were yesterday. Once you accept where you're at, I think it stops. And there was a guy that I've mentioned a lot, Buckminster Fuller. Buckminster Fuller was considered like a genius. He invented the geodesic dome, the mathematical equivalence of synergy and all this. And he wrote about, for instance, goal setting, why goals are never quite as... what's the word? That you never get the joy out of the goal. You think that the goal you set, if I can just achieve that, then that's it, I'll be totally happy. And you achieve, and suddenly, well, maybe I could now go for this or go for that. And the whole idea of, he says, is it's about bodies in motion. It's about propelling you into motion. That's why you're never satisfied. That's why, maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do that, maybe I'll do it. Whether it's the rush you get from it, who knows? But because he said anything that stands still long enough is probably dead, whether it's a rock or a plant or an animal or a person, Stand still long enough, it's probably dead. So I just found that to be an interesting sort of take on what we're talking about. On just it doesn't mean you should bloody get manic and drive yourself mad, but just what else can I learn today? How else can I express my passion? How else can I be a slightly better artist in whatever I'm doing today than what I was yesterday? I think it's a healthy mindset to have, because society's full of mediocrity. Look at it. I mean, God help me. It's the few that actually strive and just stand out, and we go, oh, God, how did it be to be one of those? But they started like all of us, whether it's The Rock or, who you could go on and on with artists that were just everyday people that just aspired strongly and wanted it badly enough to stand out and become what they became.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of what this Olympic medalist said to me once. It's not always about the results, it's who you become in the process of things, right? And he said, to me also, you need to be able to feel and adapt. Don't get too much in your own head or get too much in your own way. You need to always focus on evolving, like you were mentioning. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, we reach a point where we tend to settle.
That's a good word, mediocrity. Settling to me is mediocrity. And yeah, you'll see champions that actually become champions, and not just become champions, but stay champions. Or again, like a Mick Jagger, look at the length of his career. I mean, that's the difference, because there's a lot of, as we know, one-hit wonders, you know. They're examples of people that thought, oh, this is good, I've achieved enough. And by the way, a lot of what restricts going ahead, this is another I love talking about, is fear. There's a great saying that fear keeps people ordinary.
That's true.
Because you get confronted with a challenging, say if you're an actor, role, or a martial artist, you've got to get in the ring and fight. That's incredibly confronting and challenging. The easiest thing in the world is to rationalize why you shouldn't do it. Oh, well, not now, not for me. Oh, maybe a bit old. Oh, I've got a bit of an injury. You know, there's a lot of reasons. But the idea of actually saying yes and waking up the spirit and then having to figure out how the fuck am I going to do it now that I've said yes, that's the difference of a lot of these people that are incredibly high achievers, you know. I love the saying, Customato, you know, Tyson's trainer. I don't know whether his original quote, but he used a quote called that says, fear is a friend of extraordinary people.
I love that.
Everybody feels fear if you're human. Anyone that says, you know, I have another friend in England who written some wonderful books on fear. He was a doorman and everything else. And he talks about his life. He said, anyone that says they don't feel fear is either stupid or they're lying. So the question is, what do you do with it? You know, Bruce Lee even used to say, use it as a turbocharge, that adrenaline pulsing in your system that you interpret as fear is just a turbocharge to propel you into something great. And, you know, so that idea of just taking a challenge and just saying yes. In fact, I first got an example of that. I did a course called Money and You by Robert Kiyosaki, you know, who Rich Man, Poor Dad, or Rich Dad, Poor Man, which way, whatever. And so I did this course, and again, it's just an example. He remembers when he decided he wanted to get into real estate, and he got an agent, and they drove in a neighborhood. There was something like, and again, I'm paraphrasing, 12 houses for sale. They're driving out, and he says to the agent, I'll take it. And the agent said, oh, yeah, which one? He said, all of them. And he said, the idea being that suddenly he's, in his conscious mind, suggests his subconscious is going, what the fuck did you just do? How are you going to do this? But the spirit got awakened to now he had to find a way to actually make that happen. Once he said yes and committed, there's a lot of power in that. Not easy to do. But again, I would argue, what do you got to lose in so many situations and circumstances by saying yes? You know, there's a lot of actors, there's a few incredible actors that have been noticed as saying they won't even take a role unless it scares the shit out of them, because there's no challenge anymore in not doing that. And by taking on a role that scares them, meaning there's aspects of the character of the role that they don't even know how to address, that's the growth, right? So then they grow as a performer and as an artist. And yeah, that's it's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And it kind of reminded me of this quote that I've heard on a personal development seminar. It's like, everything you just explained, there's two definitions of fear: F everything and run, or face everything and rise.
All right.
And a lot of actors or celebrities, they tend to face everything and rise and tend to grow. And you have an upcoming film coming up that you were mentioning that it scares the hell out of you.
Yeah.
I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, it's a film. I was sent a script by a young lady I knew, Lucinda Bruce, and she had a script called Sacrifice. And it's an LGBTQ-based movie, you know, which, again, not an area that I'm at all versed in, though well aware of it, you know, as we are in society these days. But it was script, and, you know, there was probably 5 great scenes in it for me, and it was, you know, I'm playing a military dad. He's a lifetime military man, very old school, Anzac, Gallipoli, this whole thing. He's got a daughter and son, and halfway through the movie he finds out his son's gay, and he's vehemently against gays in the military, which again is quite topical, goes on a bit of a rant. I can't tell you, I won't give away the story, but zero action in a complete drama. And when Lucinda called me and I said, "Oh, do you think you'll do it?" And I said, "The only reason I'm saying yes is because it scares the shit out of me. I don't even know how I'd play that role." I've since been doing lots of research because the character has PTSD, he's on medication, he shakes a bit, he's got flashbacks to his war times. Fascinating role. And that's an example of what I'm saying. The easiest thing for me would be, well, there's no action, that's not what I do. I thought, oh my God, what a challenge, right?
Absolutely.
Just to take on the dramatic aspect. So that's we're starting to shoot that in September in Melbourne. So yeah, I'm very excited about that. Scared, but excited.
That's very scary. I couldn't imagine the process of you being able to get into character. What's your path or your process in order for you to be able to get into character, especially like on a role like that?
It's not on. You know what? There's absolute parallels with martial arts and the process, at least for me, with trying to prepare for a role, and that is preparation. It's doing like I'm just researching so much on PTSD, on the medications of people. I had no idea how many like facets of life can create PTSD in a person, you know. And by the way, for those, it's post-traumatic stress disorder. For those who don't know what PTSD stands for, it's fascinating. Not just from war veterans. I mean, my wife has it. You know, my wife had a traumatic accident 2 years before we met, head trauma, you know, all this sort of stuff. Was given a 2% chance of living. It was due to being in the Amazon jungle with Albie Mangles, who a lot of Aussies would remember. He did the documentaries World Safari. Judy went away and was in the Amazon, and they had that accident. Well, she was also told she wouldn't even survive. Anyway, she's an incredible survival story. But she still has, if we're in the car and a car tends to appear in your peripheral, all of a sudden she will just freeze. And that's an example of PTSD. You know, it's an emotional attachment to a traumatic event you went through that still affects you almost involuntarily in stages of your life. And again, it's just fascinating to hear of people. I say to people, can you imagine whether you're Israeli or Palestinian or whatever, being in Gaza and what those people experience? I mean, how could you not have traumatic, disorders as a result of that? And I'm not a military man. I've been married 38 years, but I don't have kids. So this is why it's a frightening thing for me to take on. But you prepare as much as you can. And with acting, when it comes to the actual time, like Michael Caine in his book said, just be a good listener. Actively listen as though for the first time and respond as though for the first time, even though you've rehearsed it maybe 100 times. Martial arts is like that. You do all these blocks and punch and kick. You do all things that are for possible combat scenarios. But when it happens, it's completely reactive because you don't know what somebody you confront in the street or a bunch of them are going to do. So you just have to be in the moment and react, hopefully, with the correct response. And I think acting is exactly the same. So all I can do with this role is get into the mind of so many of these people, talk to as many people as I can. This Lean Shaw is a lady who's directing. She's so committed to the project, been doing lots of research. So there's lots of support in that regard. I'm meeting with, there's Isaac who's playing my son. In other words, we're trying to get as familiar as we can with the characters and their relationships and everything else. And pretty much then, when they say action, just listen and just react. They say as honestly as you can, at least as the character, and hope it all works out. Might all go to shit.
That's true.
But, the worst thing for me would be sitting at home thinking, gee, I probably should have at least given that a try,
Yeah.
That's the difference. I'm excited. And then there's another film, it looks like, with Jason Statham at the end of the year called Rise of Heroes, which is incredibly exciting. That looks like it's all financed and going to go. So, hey, I should be retired now at my age, but, why? I'm not ready to curl up in a little fetal position,
exactly.
and accept not doing anything. It's just I'm still very, very curious about things, and so it's exciting to just be challenged,
Yeah, he has an interesting story as well because he comes from a rugby background, and he was a Commonwealth Games athlete.
Yeah,
And
right.
making that
Diver, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't he? Yeah, I think.
Yeah. And he made that transition into acting at around the age of 29.
There you go. Another example, right?
That's
just,
right.
Just giving it a shot and going for it. Listen, is Teddy Roosevelt, one of the presidents, he has a great little saying about, the fact of having, and I'm totally messing this up, paraphrasing, but the idea of actually trying and failing is better than never having even tried in the first place, At least you can say, well, I gave it a good shot. Yes, it didn't work. I think that's far better than just out of fear going, oh, no, I don't want to look like an idiot and make an ass of myself, And yeah, there's plenty of examples of people like that. And again, you're mentioning Jason. Like, I get back to the rock and roll. It's like I used to set a punching bag for James Taylor. I just spent time with James. James, 76. His career, God, since the 70s, still going. He still got nerves, We'd set up a punching bag so he could just sort of release a bit of adrenaline in his body before he walked on stage. Linda Ronstadt, I was with Linda. She suddenly got this just total nervous attack about going on stage, and it was in the afternoon before the show. Believe it or not, I found a little motel. We just checked into a room. I just had a chat to her. I said, Linda, the great thing is, first of all, why wouldn't you be scared? You're up there. You're in front of all these fans. They're expecting amazing things. But I said, the great thing is you can choose to do it or not. You don't have to do what you're doing with your career. And it was just trying to sort of help what I would go through if I was going to do, say, a big martial arts exhibition or whatever, and how I would sort of try and allay those fears, accept that they're fears, but then confront them anyway. Yeah, so it's, I guess what I'm saying again is I'd love going back to Jeff Thompson saying anyone that says they don't feel fear, at least confronted with something important, is either lying or they're stupid. The difference is saying yes and just going ahead anyway,
That is very true. And you currently worked on Furiosa as well, and you worked with some of the A-list actors. Tell us about that experience.
Fantastic. Well, that started with Fury Road. I played a character in Fury Road. We were Praetorians, which goes back to Roman days. They were like bodyguards to the emperors and stuff like that. So the Praetorians I was like the main bodyguard to Immortan Joe, who's the white-haired dude with all the breathing apparatus on him. So, and I was also fight coordinator, went off on Fury Road. Furiosa is a prequel, so it's set presumably 10 or so years earlier than that, and it's all about how Charlize Theron's character became Furiosa, how she lost her arm, and also some of the other characters. A little different. Fury Road was pretty much a truck left one place, went there, turned around and came back, and it's everything that happened to that, the war rig as it's called. This is a little different, and it has chapters. There's 5 chapters, and for those who haven't seen it, and you basically learn a little bit more about characters like the People Eater and different ones that were in Fury Road. So Anya Taylor-Joy is she was 26 when we shot Furiosa. So she's very young, and she's, again, playing the young Charlize Theron character. Chris Hemsworth is the lead villain. And I just can't tell you, out of everything I've ever done, at least from the entertainment point of view, to be a part of such an iconic franchise as Mad Max with George Miller, it doesn't get better than that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting because I was watching something on YouTube the other day from a filmmaker, and he's like, doing a project like that is extremely hard. And for George Miller to attempt Furiosa and the other Mad Maxes is something extraordinary, and a lot of filmmakers actually look up for him for it.
Oh, God. It's years out of one's life. Now, and I would say this to anybody, every frame of Fury Road or all the other Mad Maxes or Furiosa has George's fingerprints on it. There's nothing that happens in films you're not aware of. And to the point that, well, if Fury Road, if you were in a vehicle, which you usually were, you're in a sort of a tin can in the Namibian desert in South Africa for bloody months on end. But if we were told that if George came around and asked, well, what's that dent on the vehicle? Why is that scratcher? Or why is that tear in your costume? You had to have a story as to how that happened. In other words, he said, there's no stunt people in this, you're all actors. And he wanted you to have a whole background on your character. Gets back to what we talked about earlier, right? Understanding performance and drama and character. And, I watched him on Furiosa. There was one shot where there's probably, again, I'm guessing now 30 bikers and everything in this frame and motorbikes, and it's a drone shot. So they're tiny little pictures that I was watching on the monitor, and he, no, move his foot 6 inches this way, or no, just turn that hand a little bit. You could hardly see them. I thought, I'm watching Rembrandt paint a bloody picture here, meaning there was no detail in the frame that he wasn't on top of and aware of and adjusting to suit his vision for the movie. I had a little, I won't go into detail, Anya was a little bit finding a way with the script and working with George. And I just remember saying, Anya, just trust George. I said, put your trust in George. It's not a secret that Tom and Charlize didn't have complete trust in George in Fury Road until I saw the end result. And then they were like, oh my God, right? I said, so same thing, just put your trust in George's vision. And it is his baby. I mean, it started with the very first Mad Max, however long, 30, 40 years ago, and now he's still doing them.
Yeah, that was a budget under like $1 million.
Oh yeah, way under, a few hundred thousand. It made almost more money per dollar spent than just about any other movie. So, and he's a lovely, lovely man, George. He's people probably misjudge George because he's so nice. I always say he's like that sweet, kind uncle you wish you had, because he just talks quietly, he never gets anxious and everything. But God, he knows exactly what he wants, and you're not going to win many arguments arguing against his vision against yours, So, except he's the direct and go. And Anya's amazing in it. She had a lot of issues with, of course, very little dialogue. It's about 30 words in the whole thing. It's all about the eyes and expression, the face. It was great, just, doing a bit of training with Anya and sort of understanding her process. Tom Burke, who plays Praetorian Jack, he was a wonderful English actor. I spent a lot of time with him in the gym and just talking about character. And by the way, I'm not presuming that I'm going to tell him how to act, but having done 80-plus action movies as an actor, at least I understood what's involved in a fight scene. We have a term that we call doing a fight scene non-verbal dialogue. It's punches and kicks and grunts and all this sort of stuff, but it's absolutely part of the story, And George is one of the masters of this. There's the coming from, or why is the fight happening? Why did you get in this fight? Or why is that person attacking? It doesn't just happen out of a void. It's part of the script and it's part of the character. And it starts with, again, why am I doing this in the first place? Meaning that if I suddenly had a fight scene with my character who's my brother, it would be very, very different from a fight scene with somebody that's just grabbed my wife on the butt and insulted her. Do you know what I mean? So the emotional journey is different, and that's part of what we try and do is work out, what's the emotion, and it's almost what happens between the beats. It's like I worked with Scarlett Johansson in New York for a few months to get her ready for Ghost in the Shell, took her to a gun range to so she would know what live fire felt like. And, I said, basically to Scarlett, when you shoot a gun, there's no blinking this. You've done this since you were 3 years old. That's your character. That's why we want you to train so hard in how to hold a gun, for instance, so you're believable as a character. And you try and get into their heads in that sense. You used to teach them breathing. We call it autogenic or combat breathing. It's basically, well, they call it box breathing, where you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. This is a technique a lot of, whether SAS, special, forces do just before going into life or death situations, and it's designed to bring your heart rate and your pulse rate down to a manageable level that you can cognitively handle stress, you know, because otherwise if you're a little scared, and I'm bringing this up as it relates to combat, but it's the same with suddenly you're about to go in front of camera and do an important scene, and you feel your adrenaline starts to hit your system, you know, your pulse goes up. And in combat, it can go up sometimes to 200 beats a minute, at which time you would lose all complex motor skills, and you only really have gross motor skills. We used to say your forebrain is hijacked by your midbrain, and you become almost like an animal. It's called fight or flight. Yeah. Well, you're in survival mode. Blood is withdrawn from all the major muscle groups of the body into the essentials like the thighs or whatever, so you can either fight like a motherfucker or run like a motherfucker. Well, the breathing is important because, again, if someone like Margot Robbie, you know, for instance, is ready to do a big combat scene in Suicide Squad, I just get her to breathe. Because I said, you can't go into this with doubt or with fear, because this is what your character does. You could do this in your sleep. So all of those aspects help to put an actor in a correct frame of mind. And again, the other thing I remember saying to Scarlett once, I said, if I slapped you in the face right now suddenly, you would have an emotional reaction. You'd either be, what the fuck? You'd either be pissed off at me or you'd be scared or whatever. Well, the same thing when you think about a fight. You know, if you're in a fight, you know, Tyson was famous for saying everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Well, bring that into a fight. You know, you're fighting and you think you're the world's best and suddenly you're getting your ass kicked. How do you feel then? What's the emotion between the kicks and the punches and everything else? Or you shoot somebody. How do you feel about you've just taken a life? Does that make sense? So there's an incredible story, emotional story and journey within that fight scene, and when it finishes and what happens after that. I love that aspect. I'm fortunate to be able to work with, you know, Margot Robbie again. God, nobody better. She's the girl next door. She's the sweetest, loveliest person, but God, is she committed, you know. She just wants to be the absolute best version of herself. She'll come every night, even if she's exhausted after a day's filming, and just put in a bit of work on future choreography or whatever. It's a big lesson for everybody. You talk about musicians, what I learned. Well, I look at people like Margot or even Scarlett, and I say, no wonder they've got the careers they've got. It's because of that commitment. And again, they just want to be the absolute best they can be. But that shit doesn't just happen by accident. It takes work,
no coincidence. Right? And it's phenomenal when you think about it too, because I know you would know this better than anyone. There's no scarier feeling than going into a fight where you never really know the outcome sometimes, and there's a chance of you getting beaten up or you beating up on someone, or you're in there for a tough fight. So I just have one last question for you. If you could go back in time when you were about to start your acting journey, what advice would you give yourself?
Probably to know more about what I was getting into. But again, you understand it wasn't my intention. I just happened, because the funny thing is, I was playing Keo, who was masked. His eyes are darkened out a little bit because technically I was supposed to be Asian, like it was an action role. It became almost like the Darth Vader of martial art movies. But I also played a character called Longlegs, you know, and I still laugh. My first line was sit down. I'm telling Chuck and these other terrorists in this recruitment hall to sit down. In my head, I'm like, oh, how easy is this? Suddenly, I'm on the set and I've got to say it out loud. I suddenly realized there was 10 ways to say sit down. I could say sit down, sit down, sit down. I was like, fuck me. No wonder people go to acting training. That's what spurred me to realize there's more to this than meets the eye, you know? Hence, yes, I could throw a punch and a kick, but delivering a line and being believable and being character, that's propelled me into acting classes. Again, I just didn't want to be mediocre. One would argue I still am, but, you know, if you were here, I'd have a go at you for that. But anyway, but you know what I'm getting at? So it's the advice is just You know, I love quoting, there's a saying Napoleon has that confidence, and he was talking about war, confidence is a factor of preparation. The more prepared you are for combat, the better you are to handle it. Well, apply that to just about anything that you want to excel in. It's about how much you prepare. Don't just walk on if you've got a stunt role, an acting role, or you're going to march. Don't just walk in and just sleepwalk your way through it. Once again, fear. Fear propels you into trying to allay those fears by preparing more. The more prepared you are, again, the more confident you'll be on the day. Does it mean you'll be amazing? No. I don't think I'm saying, oh, well, as a result, you should be just incredible and Academy Award winning performances. No, but at least it will help you be, for that day, the best version of you, you know? So that's my advice. Just, again, you might get that one chance on a set. I keep going back to stunt guy number 3 who's suddenly given a line. How well you do that and how well you impress the stunt coordinator, the director, the assistant director, the camera, maybe that could just lead to another role where they say, oh, I like that guy, you know, he knew what he was doing, excuse me, he was confident, maybe he's usable for something else, who knows, you know.
That's great advice, and I just want to thank you again for coming down and taking time from your busy schedule to be here.
You're welcome. Thank you, Justin. Enjoyed it. Hope I didn't ramble on too long, but
No, that was perfect.
I love the journey of the whole thing. It's fun. Thank you.
No worries. Until next time.